At 29, Hannah was absolutely stunning. A tall, slender brunette who could turn heads in an instant. As she aged, her figure filled out, losing that youthful thinness and gaining curves that were even more enticing. Her long, luscious brown hair and those big, captivating eyes made her simply irresistible. She'd always been the center of male attention, but she remained loyal to her husband, whom she'd been married to for just over a decade. Liam, Hannah's husband, was a fun-loving, handsome guy, 33 years old, and a successful businessman who naturally attracted female attention. But like his wife, he kept things in check. The most he allowed himself was a harmless flirt now and then, just enough to boost his ego. On the eve of Hannah's birthday, they decided to invite their closest friends to their cozy apartment in the city center. It was her 29th birthday, and Liam had a special surprise in store. A gorgeous set of underwear from the famous Victoria's Secret brand. What wouldn't he do for his beloved? Before leaving for work, he laid out a beautifully wrapped skirt and a set of underwear on the bed, kissed his sweetly sleeping wife, and headed for the exit. Hannah spent her entire morning trying on countless outfits. She paired that coveted skirt with every t-shirt, shirt, and blouse she owned. She looked absolutely breathtaking, especially with the stockings that came with the set. Once she settled on her evening attire, she made a shopping list for the party and headed to the store. By 7 that evening, the table in the living room was perfectly set. Glancing at the clock, she waited for Liam to come home. When he finally arrived, he was utterly speechless at the sight of his wife. Is she really planning to greet guests dressed like that? He wondered. The moment he stepped through the door, Hannah made sure he noticed she was wearing every single one of his gifts. She kissed him and whispered that after the guests left, she'd give him a night he'd never forget. Liam was thrilled she loved his present. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. Hannah's friend Camilla and her husband Ethan arrived first, followed by Asher and his wife, Olivia, and finally Madison. One by one, the apartment filled with guests. The clinking of glasses echoed through the living room as soft jazz played in the background. The girls chatted about work, vacation plans, and the latest American TV shows. Now it's worth mentioning that in her outfit, especially with those high heels, Hannah looked incredibly striking. Any husband in Liam's shoes would be consumed with jealousy. He tried to keep an eye on how she moved, how she leaned over the table to pass dishes to the guests. Paranoia began to creep in as he watched Ethan, who barely sat at the table and somehow always ended up in the spot with the best view of Hannah. His fears weren't entirely unfounded. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her, staring at her with an intensity he couldn't hide. Liam pulled Hannah into the hallway and in a hushed voice demanded, "Button up your shirt right now. I can see him staring at you." "Don't start, Liam. No one's staring at me. You're being ridiculous. Stop it, please. But could you at least fix your stockings? They're already starting to show." "What?" "And give them something to talk about." Just as Hannah lifted her skirt to adjust her stockings, Ethan appeared in the hallway, on his way to the kitchen to grab another bottle of champagne. Hannah giggled and quickly smoothed down her skirt. "I didn't see a thing," Ethan said calmly as he walked into the kitchen, and the two of them returned to the party. A bit later, Liam's friends, Michael and Andrew, showed up. Michael had quite the reputation in their circle for being a ladies' man. He wasn't exactly into polygamy, but let's just say he never shied away from female attention. Andrew, on the other hand, was more of a romantic, and that gave him a certain charm. He was picky about women, unlike Michael, who wasn't as selective and often didn't hesitate to spend lavishly on them. Andrew admired Hannah and thought Liam was incredibly lucky to have her. He never crossed the line, always keeping a respectful distance between admiration and inappropriate behavior. Michael, however, made it clear that Hannah was exactly his type. But Hannah loved Liam deeply and never gave him a reason to be concerned. Liam understood this and didn't hold it against his friend, confident that Michael wouldn't take things further than a harmless flirtation with his wife. As the evening wore on, The guests took turns offering toasts, each trying to outdo the other with their eloquence. The champagne flowed freely, loosening up both the guests and their hosts. About an hour and a half into the celebration, Hannah had already downed 5 glasses of her favorite champagne. Michael and Ethan couldn't keep their eyes off her. Gradually, the guests moved to the sofa, while Hannah slowly cleared the table and carried the dirty dishes to the kitchen. The guys eagerly tried to help her, taking every opportunity to get close or even brush up against her. It was time to take out the raspberry pie she'd baked. Making sure no one was in the kitchen, she bent down to check if it was done. Just then, Michael appeared in the doorway and froze, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. "Could you help me get a baking sheet? I think the pie is ready," she said softly. Without a word, he stepped in, and holding the edge of the towel, helped her lift the baking sheet. Suddenly, Hannah found herself trapped between the hot pan and her husband's friend, who brazenly assumed the role of Liam. She squealed, telling him to put the baking sheet down and let her go. Michael, savoring the moment, slowly complied. As she pulled away, she instinctively raised her hand to slap him, but he caught it just in time. Quickly, he stammered that she had misunderstood. He only wanted to help because he was afraid she might get burned, and he couldn't let that happen. Smiling, he asked for her forgiveness and tried to embrace her. Embarrassed, Hannah's face flushed with shame, but the awkward moment didn't last long. Liam appeared in the kitchen. Seizing the moment, Hannah grabbed the baking sheet and hurried back to the guests. After the incident, she avoided making eye contact with Michael, while he, on the other hand, took pleasure in catching her gaze, reveling in her unease, and sensing her growing fear of being alone with him. The champagne had run out, and whiskey was brought out. The girls mixed it with Coke, while the guys drank it on the rocks. The soft background music had turned into something more upbeat, and an hour later, they decided to head to a club to dance. By this point, most of them were pretty drunk. Hannah had regained some composure after the incident in the kitchen, but the alcohol was starting to cloud her judgment. Before leaving, she decided to change her shoes. In her inebriated state, she didn't realize that all the other guests had already gone downstairs. The groomsmen and Liam took their time getting ready. They straightened their jackets, polished their shoes, and generally did everything they could to stay a bit longer and watch the tipsy hostess change her shoes. Not everyone went to the club. Candela mentioned she had to get up early and asked them to keep an eye on her husband. A couple of hours later, she headed home. Andrew, the groomsmen, Asher, and Olivia took the first car to the club. Liam, Hannah, and Michael were supposed to take the second one. When Hannah finally made it downstairs, the first car had already left, and the rest of the group was waiting for her in the second taxi. Liam was in the front seat, trying to give the driver directions and map out the best route. The car, parked close to the house wall, made it impossible to get in from the right side, where Madison was already seated. Hannah realized she'd have to sit next to Michael. That jerk, she thought, has thought of everything. Drunk and disoriented, she didn't even ask Liam to switch places with her. She figured he wouldn't dare make a move with her husband right there. Throughout the ride, Madison was engrossed in her phone, and Liam kept directing the taxi driver on the best route. Michael, seated in the middle, took every opportunity to casually brush against Hannah. Struggling to stay awake and keep control, she still found herself drifting off. "We're here. Time to get out," Michael announced. Hannah stumbled out of the car, catching up with Liam as they entered the club. Liam, ever the observant husband, noted her appearance: high heels, the edges of her stockings peeking out, and an almost open shirt. They joined Madison at the bar, only to find there was no decent whiskey, so they opted for cocktails instead. Shortly after, Liam's colleague approached them. After congratulating Hannah on her birthday, he took Liam aside to discuss some work issues. The girls continued to drink, and when they were sufficiently tipsy, went dancing. Madison quickly disappeared into the crowd. Immersed in music and alcohol, Hannah allowed herself to completely surrender to the rhythm. A local guy came up to her from behind and started dancing with her. She was glad of his attention and did not resist when he lightly touched her waist and hips. Michael saw Hannah in the guy's arms, with him whispering in her ear. She leaned in, her arms around his neck. Michael seized the moment, snapping several photos on his phone. Then, playing the role of the jealous partner, he pulled her off the dance floor. Hannah, too inebriated to resist, followed him reluctantly. Once outside the club area, she mumbled that she needed to go to the ladies' room urgently to recover a bit. Michael, wrapping his arm around her, insisted on accompanying her. The restrooms were shared, and the line was long, forcing them to wait. Despite her pleas for him to leave her alone, he claimed he was protecting her from unwanted attention. When it was finally her turn, Hannah rushed to the vacant stall. Fearing Michael might follow, she tried to close the door quickly, but her feeble efforts couldn't hold back his stronger push. They both ended up in the small restroom. Through the haze of her intoxication, Hannah realized how dangerous the situation was and tried to push him out, but he easily overpowered her. He shut the door behind them, leaving her feeling trapped and helpless. Backing up against the sink, she looked at him in confusion, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Michael seemed to relish her vulnerability, feeling like he had control over her. Unable to stand, she felt his lips on hers. With her eyes closed, she whispered, "Michael, please, don't. I'm begging you." Despite her pleas, they ended up having sex. Afterward, as she tried to regain her composure, the weight of what she had done began to hit her. She covered her face with her hands and started to cry. Michael lifted her off the floor, took out his phone, and showed her some photos, one of her hugging another guy on the dance floor. "I hope you understand now that our little secret needs to stay hidden," he said. "Change my name in your phone so Liam doesn't suspect anything. It's better for everyone if fewer people know about our meetings." Without waiting for her response, he opened the door and left, leaving it ajar. Stunned and humiliated, she struggled to grasp what Michael meant by, "so that fewer people know about our meetings." Lost in her turmoil, she didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care, that the restroom door creaked open, and the same guy she'd been dancing with earlier appeared. After Michael had pulled him off the dance floor, the stranger wasn't ready to give up. Determined not to let his chance slip away, he followed them. From a distance, he had seen which stall she had entered. He pushed open the door and said, "Shall we pick up where we left off?" Grabbing her by the arms, he lifted her and pressed her against the wall. She stood there, silent and compliant. He was in a hurry, so the encounter was quick. Without a word, he left the booth. The effects of the alcohol seemed to dissipate, and she realized she had no time to come up with an excuse for Liam, who had probably been searching for her for a while. She pulled out her phone and saw 15 missed calls from Liam. Regaining her composure, she called him back. "Finally, I've been looking for you all over the club for an hour. I'm so sorry. I was in the bathroom the whole time. I'll come out to meet you now." "Still there? I'm coming out to meet you. I'll wait for you at the exit." Hannah quickly composed herself and made her way to the exit. In the taxi, she scolded Liam for leaving her alone, playing the situation to her advantage and making him feel guilty. Liam did his best to defend himself. When they arrived home, the driver rushed to open the door for her and help her out of the car. They went inside, and Hannah kept the night's events to herself. Later, she had to meet with Michael, who was blackmailing her with the photos he had taken. They agreed he would delete them, and he kept his word. Hannah deeply regretted what had happened, and it never occurred again. She now tries to be more cautious and modest.